Welcome to a very special episode of the Strategy Skills podcast. Today, Michael and I will be talking about making 42 million in fees from one engagement. This is part 2. If you missed part 1, make sure that you go and revisit earlier episode. Before we dive in, we have not one, but 2 gifts for you. Number 1, overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It is free download. You can get it on firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. It is firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And the second gift is McKinsey and BCG winning resume, also free download. Get it at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. So let's talk about making 42 million in fees from one engagement. Michael, welcome.
Hey, Kris, good to be interviewed this time around.
So this 3-part series is divided into person, assets, and problem. And last time, Michael, we covered person. And today we will be focusing on assets. And we will again do this series in the format of me interviewing you, Michael, because while both of us were working on strategy for this program, you were the coach for this particular client. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
The entry program was difficult for us. Let me give you a quick recap, everyone, before we dive into the interview. The Andrew's career was in free fall. He wasn't getting promoted. There was no path to promotion. He wasn't getting any of the big tax assignments. In fact, it was so bad that he had made the decision to leave this large professional services firm and join a much smaller boutique just so that he can get the title, even though his salary would have dropped. And when we came in, the goal was to get Andrew into partnership. And there was immediate difference of opinion because Andrew wanted to be a partner in the tax practice because that is what he knew. That seemed the most logical thing for him. But as we worked with him, we realized that a better path was to rebuild the failed innovation division within the professional services firm where he worked. And in phase 1, we showed you in details how we did that. We spoke about the phase 1 in the last episode to give you sufficient context. So if you missed it, make sure you listen to the previous episode first. And if you want to work through the actual phase 1 program, you can work through the whole 214 episodes of phase 1 if you are a legacy or insider member on strategytraining.com. The title of that program, if you want to find it on strategytraining.com, it is called How to Sell Over 10 Million Consulting Studies. And when phase 1 ended, Andrew stopped working with us and he made a series of very bad decisions that took his career even further away from the success. When he wanted to come back to work with us again, we were very hesitant because he had created so many obstacles since he stopped working with us. He put himself in a far more difficult position. So when we started in phase 2, when we agreed to work with him, we are not really starting off of the successes of phase 1. The momentum was lost. Michael, so let's talk about the difference between phase 1 and phase 2.
So there are significant differences. In fact, you could say they're different programs. That's why we broke them up, right? So phase 1 was all internal. Andrew was working within his company. It was mostly cost reduction work. He was not very well known. So there was not a lot of resistance to what he was doing. The work he was doing internally was less risky. And to be fair, I'm going to be honest in talking about the problems we overcame. It's not to make someone look bad, but just to show you how difficult these things are. I would say in the beginning, he was also more humbled and he was more humble. So phase 2 is the opposite of that, because phase 2 is going out to sell to external clients, working with senior partners, dealing with competition from other firms. It's about delivering what you sell in a sustainable way. So even though people listening to this are going to think, well, I listened to the Andrew part 1, phase 1, it's going to be very similar. It's going to be completely different. It has no bearing on phase 1. As you said, Kris, and as you know, we had to start from scratch. So it's like someone saying, well, it's an innovation program. I know what innovation is like. You're just selling it externally. That's like saying a divorce lawyer and a litigation lawyer are the same. They have completely different skills. They can't swap and do whatever they want. So phase 2, it's all external facing. And I would say it's also an element of taking on a rival firm, which you'll see in the show when it comes out, tends to play a bigger role in this phase.
So we started off in a somewhat worse position. He turned off some partners. They didn't want to work with him and felt that he was expecting too much. And Andrew felt that because of internal successes, it will be a breeze to engage external clients, and he made no progress. And he asked to work with us again, but we declined many times. Why is there a phase 2? Why did we finally agree to do this?
I think that there's two questions there. Why is there a phase 2 and why we agreed to do this? The reason there's a phase 2 is naturally because Andrew went away for a bit and tried to do things himself. But I wanted to do it as a break point, a clean break point, because I wanted him to really understand that all the things we showed him that worked really well inside the firm, they're not designed, they're not the best way to engage clients. So Andrew made the mistake of thinking that everything we had taught him, which is very effective for the problem he was facing, could be cookie-cutted and used for any problem he faced with external clients, right? So it's a very, very different program. We're teaching very different skills. In fact, you will see that in this program, it's not even about consulting. We're trying to get them to move away from consulting revenue, which is very erratic and is the low margin and so on. There's no recurring fees and so on in this, right? So the first program was internal consulting. The second one is external, and we're trying to move away from consulting. In terms of why I eventually wanted to take him on, I think while he had gone off the beaten path and he had lost some of his humility, eventually I think he understood what was needed to happen and is willing to do it. And that's a very important thing, because I work with many clients like you, Kris, and oftentimes they think that I'm going to tell them something that is going to be easily accepted and they don't have to work, because that any advice we give is going to be very hard to implement, because that's what life is like. It's just difficult to do. And in Andrew's case, he's one of those people who actually does what you ask him to do. He knows it's a trial and error approach. He's got to try it, give us feedback, and so on. So that's a very rare ability in someone, because most people, they face an obstacle, they get tired, they pull out. And if we're going to invest so much time working with someone, we want them to see it through, because it's quite disappointing when we start something significant, but we're not able to see it through.
Exactly. I 100% agree with that. So phase 2 is about engaging external clients. And basically what we are going to actually end up doing with it is significantly different. It's how we engage the first external client by leveraging the full assets of the firm, which is a very big difference in the way most people sell. What were the challenges we faced in phase 2 that are different from phase 1?
Okay, so in terms of the challenges that were unique in phase 2, I think there were a couple of ones, and there was a big recurring one. And this is probably the biggest challenge I faced with Andrew, and he faced with his partners as well. Andrew, in his mind, believed he would be successful if he sold these small strategy studies on innovation, and he compared his practice and his baseline for success was replicating some of the elite strategy firms. So the hardest challenge was every time we wanted to do something, he would look at what the elite firms were doing and he'd want to replicate that. So for him, he would be very happy to sell a few strategy studies and innovation a year, get small wins coming through. So I call this a pacing threat. You have to figure out who your pacing threat is and how you're going to respond to them. So at the beginning, this is the most difficult hurdle we faced, because Andrew was completely thinking about how do I replicate a mini consulting practice that does strategy, innovation kind of work. And it was very hard to get him to think beyond that, right? So that's the biggest challenge. It's always psychology and mindset, and it's almost always understanding whom Andrew is looking up to and who he thinks is successful, because if he doesn't tell you that, he's always going to be trying to replicate them. So I'm trying to build something different, and he's trying to basically build a mini consulting practice. That's the first big one. The second one is that he had become a little bit of a one-trick pony. So we showed him how to build the internal innovation capability, but that's all he could do. He didn't have any other ideas on innovation. He didn't have a theory of innovation. He didn't have a model of innovation. He was simply taking this one thing and flogging it to as many clients as he could. And it wasn't working. He was alienating some of the senior partners who didn't want him and their clients because he was upsetting them and so on. So that's the second big challenge. The other one is that I found that the way Andrew worked is he thought that if he just found one thing, and if he just repeated it every week for the rest of his career, he'd be successful. And I was trying to get him to understand that you've got to treat each client as having a unique problem. And you don't just go there and try to sell your innovation system to them. You've got to figure out what is their problem and then figure out what you can do to help them. An example of that, he once went to a client and saw this client many, many times. And he always told me this client doesn't want to sell, doesn't want to buy innovation work. And I asked him, Andrew, what does this client talk to you about if he sees you so often? And then he told me about this other problem the client is. And I asked him, but why don't you then focus on helping the client with this problem? And then Andrew says, but I'm an innovation partner. Yes, you are an innovation partner, but you don't have to be an innovation partner. You're there to solve the client's problem. So those are the big three recurring themes in terms of problems that we saw, as you well know, Kris.
So alienating big partners, a big problem, very hard to recover from. People remember things for a long time. How did that negatively impacted the assets we had to work with?
That is the biggest problem here, because consultants, by and large, when they're part of big audit professional services firms, they tend to look down on audit partners, tax partners, and all the other partners. And they are belittling towards them. They treat them as if they're a necessary evil. But just every time you're doing something new in any company, you're going to need the permission of certain senior and powerful people. So the way Andrew worked is that he would antagonize them, not realizing that he needed their support and backing every time he wanted to go to the risk committee to get these new things done, because some of the things we're doing, the firm has never done before, actually. So he would create these problems, and then he would wonder why they were saying no to some of the ideas he wanted to put forward. So with him, there was a huge effort to rehabilitate the relationship with several senior partners who were very powerful. And at a certain point, it was clear that maybe they liked Andrew, even if they didn't like what he was doing. But then later on, it became a situation whereby they didn't like him personally, and they didn't like what he was doing. And that was the hardest part, just teaching him why he needed to build alliances with them and how to do it.
So this lack of skill set when it comes to an ability to build relationships with important people within an organization was one element we had to work with in terms of lack of assets. What were some other skills that Andrew was lacking at phase 2 that was something we had to deal with?
The trust issue. When in any business, but especially professional services, you don't have anything unless someone trusts you. You can be the most brilliant person in the world, but if someone doesn't trust you, they're not going to listen to you. So how do you build trust? It's an important skill. How do you build trust? Not just because you're technically smart, but because people say, you know what, I don't know if what Andrew is saying is true, but I trust him. I believe he's going to get it done. So that's the first one. It's very clear to me that he struggled with that. He was never in a position to build trust with other senior people and maintain the trust. Oftentimes he would do things which is going to be harmful for another partner, but he'd do it anyway because he felt he'd rather get the credit than to give away a credit and build a relationship. And I had to teach him a technique whereby you can actually give away your sales credit to get even more sales credits. It sounds counterintuitive, but I explained that in the program. In terms of technical ability, and I would say maybe it's a mental model, I found Andrew was very closeted in terms of looking for opportunities at clients. He was not someone who saw an opportunity in things. He was not someone, if a client was complaining, he didn't realize there's an opportunity. He was very, very fixated on finding these innovation programs and trying to sell one type of innovation model into the client. And I think that's a difficult one because you don't want to be seen to be pushing clients to do something that they don't want to do. And the other one is that, and this thing surprised me about him, but I've seen it in other executives, is that you have to constantly update what you are doing because your competitors catch up. So the model that we used at his firm was fairly innovative when we did it, and we made some adjustments for them. But think about how many people listen to our programs. There are people in his rival firms who are going to be listening to these programs, and they pick up these things and they introduce it at their firms. So over a time, you reach parity with your competitors, but you have to be able to develop your thinking further and not just sit on one idea you've had.
So this lack of leadership skills when it comes to ability to build relationships and inspire trust that was showing up internally was, of course, also showing up once Andrew was trying to work with external clients and sell some work that he could do for them, that the firm could do for them.
That's well said.
Do you feel that when Andrew started working with external clients, by then he was already good enough? Or at that time, the lack of soft skills when it comes to building relationships and building trust was still a huge obstacle?
I think it was still a huge obstacle. It's a mindset challenge. People listening to this know that every time you engage someone, a client in this situation, you're taking a service or a product to them. And if they reject your service or your product, it's not the client's fault. The client isn't silly. It's not that the client doesn't get it. There's something wrong with the product, or there's something wrong with the way the product is presented, or there's something wrong with the person who is going to be installing the product, right? So what happened with Andrew is that he was of the opinion that clients were wasting his time. They were not seeing the value he brought. He got frustrated many times when he couldn't get clients to see the value that he thought he was adding to the relationship. And I had to teach him that that is completely normal. If a client fails to value something you're doing, there's nothing wrong with the client. You have to find a way to get them to see the value, assuming there is value there. But you're right, it was a difficult process because many people think, well, I'm going to read this in a book. I'm going to try it once. And if it doesn't work, then it means what I read in the book doesn't work. You've got to try something many times, perfect it, make it your own, and then you'll see results. So what would happen with him is he'd constantly try different techniques, but he'd never stick with one technique to get the results. And there were times where he would say and do things just to close a sale. But when he speaks to me, it's apparent he's doing that. I'm pretty sure it's apparent to other senior people as well, because they've spoken to many partners. They know how things work. They know what promises are made, who makes these kind of promises and who's able to keep them. So with Andrew, it was a constant struggle. And I think he got better at it, obviously. But we used this very specific technique to make him become better at it because we didn't have a lot of time. To teach someone the skills of a senior partner, a senior executive, that takes years. So we had to compress this all into a short space of time. And there we use a very specific model to get results much faster.
Michael, and we are working with many very senior people who are part of our executive coaching program. Would you say that this lack of skills when it comes to ability to build trust and build relationships is one of the most common issues you see?
It is definitely the most common issue I see. Think about how most of the world works, right? So Kris, you've done an MBA at a good school, right? So you know how much of the time is spent on analytics, right? Analyzing things and so on. But what many people fail to understand is that it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter if you have the most brilliant concept in the world that can save someone's life and a company's trajectory and so on. Unless the other party is willing to trust you, all the other things don't matter. And trust is something that's very hard to gain, but it's very, very easy to lose. And I'll give you an example of this, right? So what Andrew did is he focused on the big commitments he made to clients, but he would often forget about a minor commitment. And I always used to point out to him, you must always honor your commitments, even the small ones, because people look at the small commitments that you don't keep to decide if they're going to give you a big commitment. So he would do all these things on small things, and his response would be, but they're small things, the client's not going to worry about it, but you made a promise, you must keep it. So that's the challenge. It was almost these little paper cuts that if you have enough of them, they start bleeding quite a lot. That's the challenge we faced as we progressed.
Were there certain partners or partner within his firm with whom he already damaged the relationship where it was not possible to repay it within the time we had during phase 2?
It's very difficult to repair relationships, but we know how to do these things, right? So I was able to repair the relationships, at least I think. I mean, obviously based on feedback I gave from Andrew, but I would say we were able to repair the relationships because eventually we got the approvals we needed. And I also think that many of these senior partners have been around a long time. They've been at that firm, some of them for 4 decades. So they've seen different kinds of people come through, who's committed, who's exposing the firm to risk and so on. So while it was hard to repair the relationships, I think we repaired them to the point whereby we could get what we wanted. But also, I think towards the end, Andrew came around and understood in many cases he had acted immature, impetuous, impatient, and he was wanting respect that he wasn't giving other people. And the way he acted it, I don't know, he made this comment once to me that he doesn't like this partner, he doesn't respect this partner because the partner hasn't earned his respect. And I had to point out to him, everyone gets respect when they're born. They don't have to earn it. And these people have been at the firm longer than you. They understand the firm better than you. They are the custodians of the firm. There is a reason they are being careful. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. So it's about changing his mindset in terms of the way he looked at people.
Do you remember the defining moment, the turning point when he realized that he was immature, impatient, wanting respect he wasn't giving other people?
I don't know when the turning point occurred exactly, but I think that he was once told that by a senior partner. There was a discussion and he was told he was not acting in a respectful way towards some of the other partners. And the person who told him this was a mentor at the firm for him, so he was trying to help him. I think that wasn't the turning point because he didn't really change that much. He was still upset about things. But I think the turning point came when they approved the first part of the idea we had. I mean, we still had to work our way to get final approvals, but when they were willing to sit down and hear him out, I think he was very surprised considering how he had treated them in the past. He was surprised they would give him a fair hearing, listen to his idea, offer constructive criticism, support, help, and changes, and so on. So he had to almost wait to see someone be nice to him, and then he realized that maybe he had handled this in the wrong way.
So someone who was nice to him after he wasn't treating that person with the respect that they actually deserved.
Yeah, someone quite senior actually as well, very senior partner.
Everyone has an innovation program, but what is different about this innovation program?
So I think what made this difference is that, let me explain how innovation, as you know, Kris, how it works, right? Most companies, when they talk about innovation, they're referring to developing a new product, new revenue, and new sources of cash flow. So just about all discussions about innovation, they're pushing in that direction. And they have different ways of doing it, but pretty much that's what they all do. They all talk about let's develop new ideas and how to commercialize it and so on. And it's a very competitive space. Innovation has become a very big topic. And Andrew didn't have anything compelling there. And I didn't want to create a program to launch a product or to develop new revenue streams because I think everyone's doing it and it's pretty easy to do. Well, not very easy, but it's well known. There are systems and tools for this, right? So when we were thinking about this, we said, okay, it doesn't matter if you produce new revenue if it doesn't show in your market cap, because if you're able to produce a lot of free cash flow and your market cap doesn't go up, you become a cash cow. You become a company that's valued very little, but you have a lot of cash that's being produced. It makes you an acquisition target. So I started toying around with this idea and I said, is there a type of business whereby for whatever reason, its valuation is low, which means that there is a reason why no matter what it does with new products and so on, that cannot show through in its valuation. And I managed to find a class of companies that does suffer from that problem. And what we went is rather than looking to increase their valuation through innovation on the revenue side and so on, we looked at the cost side. And we came up with and it's not about cutting costs, we came up with a very clever way for them to increase their valuation, not by getting more cash flow, but by restructuring the cost side of things. And what was interesting about this is that there's a whole class of companies like this. So we took it to one, they liked it. We started taking it to the other ones and so on. And the important thing is we were not doing consulting work in the traditional sense. We're doing a very different kind of piece of work. And for one of the initiatives we set up, Andrew's firm's partnership ranks, they have an investment committee where they invest partners' money. That unit actually put money into one of the initiatives we set up. So we went in a very, very different direction.
And that is the best way to build a successful business, when you do something that other people are not doing.
Yes. That's exactly the point. This is a very important thing because I'll give you an example of, you'll probably know this example, Kris. You know, for a long time, everyone tried to copy Amazon, right? They were trying to delivered in the same day or within a few hours, and they set up these very expensive warehouses all across America. It's a very high cost model. And then you've got two Chinese competitors, Shein and it's called Temu is the other one. They're not interested in same-day delivery or even same-week delivery. They focus on cost, and they will take as long as they need to deliver to you. And this taking market share from Amazon. The point here is that to compete, you have to change the system. You have to change the system. You can't be doing what everyone else is doing, right? Which is why when I took Andrew into phase 2, I told him that I don't want to teach you how to sell consulting work. I know how to do it. I don't want to spend my time doing it. And I'm sure Kris doesn't want to spend the time doing that. If we take you on here, we want to do something radically different. We want to do something other consulting firms are not doing. I don't want to sell consulting work because you're not going to be successful in the long term doing that. It's not a great model to have because you go in, you work hard, they give you some money, you have no asset at the end, you have nothing but some knowledge, which you then take to another client. It's not the best model, it's not the most lucrative model, so we have to find something different.
So we got to take a brief sponsor break. When we come back, we will ask Michael to elaborate on how did we get Andrew's firm to adopt a model whereby the majority of the fees were not consulting revenue. So about 13 years ago or so, actually a little longer than that, we turned the world of business strategy and problem-solving education on its head by building out the largest and most powerful business strategy and problem-solving video and audio training library in the world, strategytraining.com and strategy training apps. We are the only place in the world where you can learn strategy and problem-solving skills without ever having to work for a major consulting firm. And you may be surprised to know that most of our members and clients are not in consulting and have no interest in being consultant. They are managers and above, all the way to executive board members within major organizations. And for non-consultants, the skills we teach are even more powerful because they are so incredibly rare. Our insider and legacy members, which are 2 membership levels on strategytraining.com that give access to some of our advanced video and audio programs, can see step-by-step consulting engagements, which dissect in detail how to lead a strategy engagement or generally a consulting engagement. You work through one of those studies, and by working through those step-by-step studies, you can learn a lot more than consultants learn during a typical engagement. And we have multiple other programs teaching some of the most powerful skills you will not learn anywhere else. The skills that can make you much more influential in any room that you are entering or spending time in. And many of our insiders and legacy members love to read, not just listen and watch. So after a lot of requests this summer, we launched something called the Strategy Control Room, which is the largest business strategy and problem-solving reading library in the world. It consists of full studies, million-dollar proposals, exclusive transcripts. We also pulled almost all our books from Amazon, and they are now exclusively locked in a vault at the Strategy Control Room advanced level. So anyway, check it out at strategytraining.com. Legacy or Insider membership gives access to some of our advanced video and audio training programs. Legacy members also get additional advanced training. Plus 2 times a month, Michael and I do a live group legacy coaching call where each legacy member can get our input for their most pressing question at that time. They can either submit the question or be live on a call. So legacy members can get live input from me and Michael 2 times a month for their particular unique situation. Imagine how powerful that can be. And the Strategy Control Room advanced level gives access to our full strategy reading library, including transcripts from some of our training programs, full studies, proposals, other strategy documents, and it also includes all our books. My view is that either of those memberships is the best business strategy education gift you can ever give someone or give to yourself, and I would recommend both of them. Now, let's get back to the main event. We got Michael with us today, and we are doing part 2 of the 42 million in fees for one engagement series. In part 1, we covered the person and gave you context from phase 1 of this program, so you can get better understanding of what we are talking about here. In part 2, we are focusing on assets. And in part 3, we will focus on the problem. Michael, so how did we get Andrew's firm to adopt a model whereby we are going for the majority of the fees, not based on consulting revenue?
So I think a good way to answer that is to say, we didn't worry about the firm. We don't have to convince the firm. We have to convince 4 people that sit on the review committee and the legal person. So the strategy was twofold here. The first one is we were working with the head of legal, or whatever it's called, from the beginning. So they knew what we were doing. They were giving us a lot of input and so on, so that when we eventually brought the idea forward, there was no issues with them because they had seen everything. They had brought up the issues much earlier. With the partners who needed to back this on the review committee, it wasn't difficult to convince them because it was positioned as something to experiment with. We explained the logic. We explained what would happen if things went wrong. We understood the risks and so on. And so that wasn't the hard part. The part that I think was much harder is the way Andrew works when he tries to take these ideas, because just remember that I'm explaining this thing and you're explaining these things, Kris, but not everyone has the ability to speak the way we speak and get the same result in front of an audience. So what does Andrew do when he faces this challenge? Well, he does something that I notice a lot of people do. He looks for examples of other people doing it to present case studies, which is a problem if you're trying to do something new that nobody's done before. And second, he tries to find some kind of analysis to support what he's saying, which is actually a bit distracting because it's a trust issue. It's not a data issue. They need to trust him. So the challenge wasn't the other people. It was sometimes when you work through Andrew and he doesn't have the confidence to do something, he creates roadblocks. And you've got to find a way to give him a plan that he can actually work with. And also when he's challenged by someone, he takes it personally and he pulls back. And he then falls back on the sheets of data he has rather than making a case. Because you're trying to make a case to do something that hasn't been done and to convince the other partners that Andrew has what it takes to manage this and manage the risks involved. So maybe it's not true to say, entirely true to say it wasn't very hard to convince the other people. It's a long process, and we knew it's a long process. So we didn't prepare for some amazing, dazzling meeting or 2 meetings once off. We started really, really early laying the groundwork for this because we know anything new, anything different, firms are very wary of it. So we need to get people comfortable early enough in the process so that over the few months, we need to get approvals and set it up and so on. We're not going to face delays at that point where they're finding out things for the first time. But as you're going to see, and as you know, as people listening to this will see, we have to constantly adjust our tactics as things change on the ground, as Andrew faced difficulties in implementing things, as we found new information and new opportunities at the client and so on. So multiple problems, but at the end of the day, it's about being committed to seeing it through rather than thinking one big thing is going to save the day.
And how did we use the rest of the firm? Because most big professional services firms, they have different parts, but they work alongside each other versus blending together and at times even looking down on certain parts of organization.
Yeah, this is a good question. You and I have spoken about this many, many times, Kris. So the question we asked ourselves, well, myself and Kris, because Andrew wasn't thinking about this, is the question we asked is, why do you do what you do with the assets you have? Why do you consult with these assets? Why don't you do something else? Why do you, just a consultant, right? Why do you choose to generally be in the advisory space? This is the most important thing to grasp in this whole program, because it's a new way of thinking. And I used many, many different examples here to get Andrew to see it. But, the example I use is a cake. When you take all the ingredients of a cake and put it together and put it in the oven and take it out, you get something that looks completely different. Completely different, right? So the question is, why is it when these big professional services firms combine all of their different skills together, why do they still basically do advisory work? Why are you not doing something else with those skills? Why have you chosen just to do consulting? Because at a certain point, they chose to do coding. At a certain point, they chose to do taxes. But what happens when you combine it all together? Would you still see teams of consultants working alongside teams of tax specialists and so on? So the kind of thinking we had is, what kind of problem uses 80% of the firm's resources or skills? And how would we deploy those resources to solve the problem? And would we still be doing advisory work if that was the case? And it's a lot of detail we go into the program in terms of how we thought this through and how we did it. But my thinking was, when you go into an assignment and you end it, you give the client a report, you get a fee, you get the knowledge which you bring back and take to other clients. And then consultants, for some reason, get super excited about implementation. Then I ask the question, why do you stop at implementation? And they will say, well, there's nothing after implementation, but there is. There's maintenance, there's ownership, there's many ways you can deploy your assets. And I want us to be creative about thinking, how do we combine all of these capabilities we have to do something other firms are not doing in a way they are not doing it to solve a problem for a client? And the opportunity eventually go after, which is a very, very different thing from consulting, is an opportunity that came about. And I remember Andrew and his team, they wanted to just sell some audit work into it and some consulting work and so on. But there was a far bigger opportunity whereby we could combine all those pieces of the firm to do something the firm hadn't done before and get a new type of revenue and so on. And this one was hard because all of us, we are hardwired to think there's only one way to be a consultant. There's only one way to use auditing skills. And I had to get them to see things very, very differently. This is the hardest part by far, because it took a long time for people to get this. Even when I explain it now, it's hard to understand it. But when you see what we end up doing, you'll understand it's something very different from what any consulting firm does.
Yes, there are a lot of layers.
A lot of layers, a lot of thinking. You've got to go back to the fundamental question of, why do we act this way? Why do we make money this way? Who got up in the morning and said we should only make money this way? Why is it we take so much pride in giving someone a report, and we take so much pride in helping them implement it? And implementation at most times is not implementation, it's project management officers. They just coordinate things and watch what's happening. So there's many pieces that they're leaving on the table. In fact, we'll come to this during the show, but Andrew's firm, like most firms in professional services, they make a very big mistake in their hiring. There's a certain type of professional class that these firms don't hire. And it's a huge opportunity. And that's where we drove the entire truck through it. We went to them and said, hey, why don't you hire these people with this particular background? They say, well, we actually don't do that work. And I'd say, why don't you do that work? Well, we've never done that work. But what happens if you do that work? What happens if you bring this skill set in? And it was hard, but it's also easy to hire. So when we wanted to do it, we could do it. But these fundamental questions: why do we structure ourselves this way? Why do we earn money this way? Why do we hire this group of people and not this group of people? So those conversations continuously, we would have them. The strategy is a set of conversations. It's not some analysis. And I never looked at Andrew's numbers or his presentation and said, wow, fix the comma here or something. It's about taking an idea to a client that they've never seen before, but they thought it made perfect sense for them. And it introduces a new revenue stream for his firm and a new way of doing business as well.
It reminds me of when Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile.
Yes.
And before that, everyone thought that there was this limit and it's not humanly possible. And then after that, a lot of runners broke that limit. And the same thing here. In business, we have this way of thinking, templates in our minds. And
yes. And there's a great example of this in the program. I can't remember the numbers offhand, but it will be in the program. We always put all the numbers and so on, so you know what's happening. Is that I remember very early when we started working together, Andrew was able to close, he managed to sell 2 innovation strategy projects. I can't remember the numbers now, but I don't think it was more than 2 million. It was pretty small. And he was so happy about it. He was telling me how successful we are. And I'm thinking to myself, that's failure. You're basically doing what you shouldn't be doing because it's easy to do it. Well, relatively easy, right? The more of these things you sell, they're not going to help us build what we're trying to build. We don't want to create another consulting unit within another professional services firm. That's been done, and it's not fun to do it. You want to do something that makes a difference. If you want to progress faster than anyone else, you have to create true value in this company. And true value doesn't come from selling $5 million a year worth of work, sitting in the partner's performance review, which I think his firm is every 2 years, and then trying to justify your salary and the fees you bring in, because you're not going to change anything if you do that. You're just going to do what everyone else does. And one day you're going to be 65 years old, you're going to be at a retirement party, and you wonder why you didn't take the shot when you could. So it's hard to do things differently, but that's what we have to do, which means you need to stop selling easy things that are going to suck you into the old way of doing things. You've got to give away bad revenue, actually, to create the opportunity to focus on the things that matter. It's like when Steve Jobs came back to Apple. One of his first acts was to cancel all the things they were working on, to just focus them on a few things. And instead about focusing on the things that you want to do or you can do, you want to focus on such a big opportunity that if you get an opening here, it's a game changer. It's so easy to go down the path of saying, well, yeah, I'm going to be like the partner at some elite firm. I sold some strategy studies. I brought in a few million, but you won't make an impact. You'll just be another partner who sold another study. And the great thing, one thing I love about clients who work at these big firms is that big firms have big resources. They can move things. They have muscle. If they believe in something you're doing, they'll make it happen. And this is the point about having alliances with the partners you don't like. If they have armies, their employees are armies. You want to have alliances with other leaders in an organization so they are willing to deploy their resources to help you do what you want to do. So for me, it was always about, if I'm doing this again, I don't want to repeat of what happened the first year where we go after. It was very successful in phase one. We delivered tremendous value. We were more successful than we expected, but we don't want to repeat it. We want to do something that makes a true impact. And if his firm can grow it and take it and turn it into something big, it would change the firm. I think that's a message for anyone we work with. Kris, you know this, is that a lot of people write in and say, Michael, I want to work with you on this. But when I ask them, what is your goal? Well, I just want to get promoted. I want to become a partner, or I want to do something simple. I don't want to spend my time on simple things. And the idea was, how do I get Andrew thinking this way? I don't know if he fully thinks in this way, but he definitely changed a lot as we work together on this. So it's always fundamental questions. Why are we doing what we're doing? And is this the best use of our time? And if the answer is no, then we need to immediately stop it and find the right thing to do, even if the process of finding it takes time and doesn't show results for a long time, because you have no choice. The life continues. And if you don't make a stand now, you're not going to make a stand in the future, because after a while, you develop a habit of bringing in unappetizing revenue to justify being there. And soon you get so tired that you can't do new things anyway. So it's a very big shift in thinking.
It reminded me of a conversation we had at the last results clinic with one of our executive coaching clients who is building a business. And he thought that at the time he was just building a business, but then we connected it to something that is happening in his country that can be very negative for his country, and how he can play a role in solving this problem and how his business can play a role. And it's so important to always think bigger, because time goes very fast. It will pass, and then you will look back and you would be much more proud of what you accomplished if you had a huge impact versus an average career.
Yes. And in fact, the language matters. Now, I don't talk to Andrew, how do we sell more work? I say, how do we do something that absolutely changes this client's life? Because after a while, if you just talk about selling and so on, it becomes quite a depressing, demoralizing discussion. You want to talk about how do you make the biggest impact you can in this client's life or this company's life? What do they need that you can give them to turn them into something that their competitors fear. Or maybe they don't have competitors. So you want to be thinking in that way, you want to be talking in that way, but it would be the worst discussion in the world if you just talk about how do you write this proposal and so on. Because when I talk about sales, people always think it's to be about proposal writing, but it's not about proposal writing. It's about finding that thing that your client needs that only you can give them, because if the way your firm is arranged to give them that. That's what we were setting out to do. And what we did is, it's a big $42 million. It may look big, it is big, but it's still just a pilot if you think about it. And they can replicate this model, which means they're doing something nobody else is doing because of resources only they have. See, that's the unique thing, because everyone tries to be someone else, but you could ask yourself, why does that competitor do this? It's because of the resources they have. If they had different resources, they do something else. So given the resources Andrew's firm has, which is significant, how do they assemble that to do something their competitors cannot replicate? That's the goal here.
The last question for today, for this session, in selecting which assets to use and how to use them, how did we know we were on the right path? Because that is a difficult thing. How did we know?
That's a really good question. The way we knew it is, I remember writing this down. I said, all these types of firms, they advise, they get fees, which they then have knowledge, which they then recycle back into the business. So my starting point is, how do we break that? How do we build assets every time we go in? And an asset has a meaning. It produces cash flow in the future, right? So that the starting point is knowing what you want. So we started off by sketching this out. And my idea was, this is what we're going to do. So the question is, how do we know we're on the right path? It's not hard to know you're on the right path, because no matter how complex something is, if you break it down, it's made up of smaller pieces you can handle. So what I was focused on is each of the pieces which comprise this overall thing working as they should? Because some of them, we started early and we can see if we're doing it right. Then another part comes online. That's another part comes online. So I wanted to make sure that each of the pieces were working and we were doing what we promised to do. So you have to think about it this way. We've got a client problem to fix. Are we fixing it? We've got our problem to fix, which is a new business model. Are we creating it? And then, is this sustainable? Can we continuously do this? Or is this something that will break apart over time? So I'm a very meticulous, I'm a stickler for checking and making sure things work and they're working as they should work. And I can tell you right now, it was a constant struggle, because every time you turned your back away, Andrew and his team would try to sell some kind of advisory work to the client, when there's a bigger opportunity out there and they're not seeing it. So you have to constantly remind them and tell them, this is what we're trying to do. This is why we're doing it. It's easy to sell more advisory work, but you need a new form of revenue that is more attractive, more sustainable, and is recurring when you're not at the client's site. So there's constant reminding them. And remember, this is experimental, what we're doing. So of course, you're going to see the mistakes we made, but that's pretty normal. We corrected them as we went ahead, but it's a good model to do things. So everything worked as we anticipated. And I was very happy at the end, because, you start these things, you don't know how they'll work, but at the end, everything worked pretty well. I was very impressed with the final result.
I was very impressed as well. And it again came back to a very important idea, thought from this discussion. We spoke about it earlier today, that in business, you need to try to do what others are not doing. Because if you're doing what everyone is doing, you're not going to get above average results, and you're not going to have above average impact.
It's also the questions you ask yourself. I remember Andrew would always ask me, Michael, I want to learn the skills of a senior strategy partner. Look, and I told him, I can teach you those skills, but unless you know how to gain the trust of someone to sell them a project, you're not going to be a very successful partner. So you got to focus on what he needs to learn. What he needs to learn is how to convince clients to trust him. So I know there are many people out there who will say, I want to learn the skill of a senior partner, but you can have the skills and you may not have any clients. So you have to know the right question to ask, otherwise you're going to get the wrong outcome. Yeah. And you're going to see that repeatedly in all the programs we found. What is the right question we are solving for you? Are we sure this is the right question? What if this is the wrong question? What would happen if we solved this problem? would we still be happy? So this is an ongoing, it's a recurring thing.
100%. This is a great place for us to wrap up this second episode in the 3-part 42 million in fees from one engagement series. In the last part of this series, Michael and I will focus on the problem. And before you go, reminder that you have 2 gifts from us. Number 1 is overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It is currently available as a free download. Go to firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And second gift is McKinsey and BCG winning resume, also a free download. Go to firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. So it is firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. Michael, thank you so much for being here with us today. That was such a fascinating discussion.
Always a pleasure speaking to you, Kris.
And for everyone tuning in, thank you for being with us today, and we'll look forward to connect with you at the next session.
Bye, everyone.